Thanks for joining me. I'm going to go ahead and get started. Everybody can see my screen okay? Doug, it looks like you're my check-in person.
Yes, I can see your screen.
All good.
We've given you a job, Doug. You're my assistant to tell me if people can't see anything.
I can see you.
Awesome. Okay, so thanks everybody for coming. And Cindy, my partner in crime, if you're on there, if you could just watch the rating room, I'm gonna close that now. So depend on you to let people in. Okay, so thanks for coming. My name is Jennifer Carlson and I am with Social Studies School Service. And in your program, it said Lakeisha would be here, but Lakeisha's not here because she had a family emergency. So I am her fill-in and I'm gonna do my best. So today we want to talk about integrating geography with history and ways we can do that to help impact students. So everybody's probably seen a map like this a million times. Today in the session, I am using a sample topic that is an easy topic we all probably know in US history. But what I'm talking about really could apply to US or world history. So I hope nobody pays much attention to the actual topic and rather just on the kind of strategy idea behind it. So we've all seen a million maps of the 13 colonies. But today I want to talk about fall line settlements. So my question to everybody is, and feel free to take off your mute if you want to talk, that's totally fine. Does anybody know what a fall line settlement is? Any guesses? Anyone ever heard of a fall line settlement?
No.
No. All right, Lynn, the brave answerer. I love it. Well, I'll be honest with you, even after studying geography as an undergrad, I had never heard of a fall line settlement either. And I picked this topic on purpose to kind of illustrate a point about where we start with students when we want them to understand a lesson that we're teaching and just other strategies that maybe we can help them engage with it in a deeper way. So if I was cruel, I would say, hey, let's all take a 5-minute quiet reading break. Let's all sit here together in this group and let's go ahead and read for 5 minutes and read this text, which of course I wouldn't do. But as an example to illustrate, I made it a little bigger here. I want to show you how great and riveting stuff this is. This is the first mountains west of the Atlantic Ocean are the Appalachians. They're the oldest mountains in North America, yada, yada, yada. And this is a pretty good text, only 2 pages, pretty well chunked for a middle school student, has one little rough kind of cross-section picture, but it's pretty much an appropriate and pretty typical middle school level reading on a topic either in geography or US history or world history. And obviously it's a page turner, so we won't spend 5 minutes reading it. But it's got me thinking that if we had spent that time reading it to learn all about fall line settlements, if we had, I always think about what a student would be thinking, or like me in college sometimes when I had to read something that I didn't have a lot of interest in personally, or that I had never heard of before. So I didn't really have much knowledge to connect to it. And the thoughts that would always run through my head and that I imagine running through students sometimes is, what did I get from this? Like, what did I get from reading this? And why do I care? And what's the importance of this? Right? It's the thing that we struggle with, trying to make read with purpose and make things relevant to students. So even though I picked a grade level appropriate text, not too complex, not very long, I could still be faced with that kind of student disconnection where they're not really engaging with it because they're not necessarily interested in it. So I'm going to throw these out as questions for this group, as opposed to me having the answers. So here's my question, because I propose that background knowledge is pretty key to students wrestling with any text. And so here's my questions to the group. How much background knowledge do you think a student needs to understand and retain a lesson? And this one's controversial, but how much background knowledge do you think a student needs before approaching a text? And I say it's a little controversial because I think there's a lot of debates about how much valuable time to spend on back building, background knowledge before a student approaches text. And that can be difficult to carve time out for that. And how important do you think it is to ground history where it happened? And if you did a lesson, do you think that the students after the lesson could actually locate it on a map? How often do you think it is that students after a lesson, especially in US or world history, could locate the continent or the region or the present day country where that lesson happened? And what thread will a student use to connect new knowledge, the new knowledge from the lesson, to something they already knew? What would be the bridge? So I just want to take a second, and anyone who is brave or wants to come off mute and share any comments on any of these questions, or if you have an answer to them, because I'm posing them as questions. What are your feelings on background knowledge for students prior to reading text?
I'm willing to share. I think that students need to have a knowledge of the vocabulary that's going to be used, as well as, more than any one piece of information, I think that they need to know how to reflect on the experiences that they've had in life, so they could recognize when a connection can take place. To be able to take the prior knowledge that they have, whether from school or from their personal life, to recognize when a connection is possible.
I agree. Anybody else about background knowledge?
Yes.
Hi, Diane.
Hi. I think one of the things about this is we tend to maybe think that background knowledge is very static and specific, but I don't think it has to be. Mm-hmm. So for example, if you're teaching or working with a group of kids in an urban area, their sort of geographic knowledge might be a really good proficiency in understanding how the bus system works. And that has application for what you're doing in geography. Maybe kids in rural areas who do a lot of camping or hiking have a really good understanding of how some of that stuff can work. So, when I see background knowledge, I think, it's about kind of honoring sort of the unique background knowledge that each of our students has and brings to the classroom.
I love that. And can I just say, you bringing up the geography, because I think that there's a real case to be made, especially for middle school students, but high school students too. Geography may be the most relatable of the social studies disciplines for students.
Yeah.
Because it's something that all students have access to, right? Whether they realize it or not, and have knowledge of. Yeah. Anybody else? Thoughts on these questions?
So like I teach psychology as well, and one of the components of memory storage is it's very reliant on place, and we don't very often incorporate place into some of the stories of history that we tell, and so it just simply helps them. It's how their brain wants it to be, is to have a place where it occurred.
I love to hear you say that, where their brain wants it to be. I think that there's real validity to that, right? Your brain is always trying to place it somewhere. In the NCSS, in the C3, there's actually a paragraph in the C3 where it talks about creating an understanding of awareness. Like they made up the word awareness, W-H-E-R-E-ness, awareness. And that students who have a sense of awareness to the topic grounded in a location that is something tangible and concrete that they can connect it to, that it helps them process information. And I think that's true. Anyone else want to comment? Again, I don't assume to have any of the answers to these.
I was just gonna say to move into like a DOK3 or DOK4, I think having that background knowledge is so important. We want students to be able not only to know things, but be able to apply it to their everyday life. So for me, I think having the background knowledge for them to be able to move on and apply what they're learning to their everyday life is like just so essential. So I would say that background knowledge is very, very important in all classrooms, geography, history, and social studies in general.
I agree. I like the way you brought in the DOK, because the DOK isn't a harder question, right? It's a multi-step question.
Mm-hmm.
So they have to navigate through multiple layers of complexity.
Yeah, and it really, the idea is to apply what they're learning, so that not only are they just learning it for a test, but they're applying actually the skills that they're learning and they're applying it to their everyday lives. So for me, like I said, the background knowledge is just so critical. Oops, sorry about that. The background knowledge is so critical that we build that up and that we continue to build on it as kids move from grade to grade.
I agree. Thanks everybody for sharing your ideas. Well, I would say, I think that one small way that we can help build background knowledge is more use of geography, and particularly using maps and those visual supports to help students engage. And partly because it addresses multiple intelligences. If you have maps in your classroom that you can write on, or ones that you got free and you print it out even, that the students have something in their hands. Maps can help connect students with something they're already familiar with. A lot of students have a familiarity with maps, whether it's GPS or a map on their phone. They have some connection to this idea of maps and what they represent. There's also just the rich visual factor of being able to register the visual with the text to connect the two is so helpful. And using maps, even if you have an old wall map in your classroom, nothing fancy, or you're bringing up Google Maps and projecting it, or you're doing it virtually because you're still teaching virtually. There's just so many ways that you can do it whole class or collaborative, because if you do breakout rooms with the map, students can be talking about that map and answering questions that were provided in groups. Like, maps are a great cooperative and collaborative way to build a workspace. So back to the fall line settlements. If you joined us late, we're talking about fall line settlements, which feels a little bit like a pop quiz, because granted it's a term that is not that prevalent anymore, which is why I picked it. But what if I had started, instead of pulling out a reading, even a grade level appropriate, pretty well chunked, vocabulary not too intense, say middle school appropriate reading. What if instead of, before I did that, what if I had started in the map space? So I did this very messy on purpose, because I have a fancy writable map. Don't know if you can all see it. And I wanted to show you basically, what if you had gone through even simple steps on a map with a student before you introduced a topic that they were unfamiliar with? So like, what if I had just had students look at the legend of a map and just look at sea level, and here have them circle what's above sea level 500 feet to 1,000 feet. And what if I had them look at the legend and just circle what's the symbol for a waterfall? Just that simple. Just start with the map legend. And then what if I had looked at the cross section on the map, which is available on most maps, even free Google Maps or old historical maps, pretty much any map, a lot of them anyway. And I had them mark, like with a mountain symbol, the Appalachian Mountains and the Atlantic Coastal Plain. And seeing that side cross section, and then seeing it against the legend with the table, in the legend. So now I'm looking at it in two different ways. So I can compare the colors in the table to that cross section of the map and start to connect what that legend means in a more visual way for students. And then what if I had, instead of starting to read the text, what if I had students underline on a map, find the Appalachian Mountains and find the coastal plain? And what if I'd had them circle all the places with a waterfall symbol in that region? So you can kind of see where I'm going with this. And in this case, you can see my dirty tissue I left there in that picture on purpose. I did this on a writable map, one you could write on and you wipe it off. So using a marker, I could wipe it off so the students could write it and mark it off. And then what if after I circled all those waterfalls, I had to mark every river that ran from the Appalachians down to the Atlantic Ocean? And then what if I had them put a boat symbol at the outlet where each of those rivers meets the Atlantic Ocean? And then I connected the dots. I had them put a dashed line between all the waterfall symbols that they had. So what if I had done these steps? And I could have done them digitally. Like, I'm with Social Studies School Service, so we have a lot of maps. So it was easier for me to do it digitally, but there's a lot of digital map resources that I could have marked up even, on a Google Smartboard or anything. But even showing it virtually, if you're teaching hybrid right now, or you're not back in class, even going through the function of circling the waterfalls on a map and showing the dots, even digitally, if they couldn't have the hands-on experience. And again, still showing them the symbols, even if I had to do it with just the picture of the map digitally, like I'm doing today. And if I had followed, like in this case, I'm showing ours, which comes with all these instructions, but having students even label the map, drop labels on the map. So all these acts of writing on the map and marking the map, who was it who said in the beginning they also teach psychology? Is that it's how your brain wants it? Is even the act of, we all know, rewriting or taking notes or writing it down, the act of that writing it down helps solidify the learning for students. What if I had pulled out the same reading that I talked about at the beginning? But now when I looked at the reading and I looked at this paragraph and said, most of the early European settlements in America were on the Atlantic coastal plain. The inlets along the coast provide safe harbors for ships. And I skipped down and said about halfway between the Appalachian Mountains and the coast, the land suddenly drops. The waterfalls or rapids on the rivers prevent boats from going further upstream. This line, where the land drops and the waterfalls appear, is called the fall line. But the important part is a number of towns developed just east of that fall line. And these are just some of the places that developed along that fall line. Places that you would hear a lot about in US history, right? Washington, DC, Baltimore, Trenton, New Jersey, Augusta, Georgia, all these places. Suddenly the text seems, at least for me, to make a little bit more sense. So let me go back one. Does anybody else think that makes a little bit more sense the second time around if you've gone through some visuals first using the maps? Anybody have any comments about that?
It's certainly a lot more interesting than just say, hey, go read this.
It's definitely more interesting. I like the way that it paints a picture. Like when you marked all of those places on the map and you see the line form, then it makes sense, like something's happening there, right? It's the fall line. So it makes sense. But then to layer on the next piece of information about what those places actually are. Anybody else? Any other comments?
I think kids are going to get that concept a lot more than just reading about it and saying, oh, look, here it is. But finding it all first and then reading is like eye-opening.
I love doing the, like if you're teaching world history and you're doing the cradle civilizations, I love doing ancient civilizations and doing the map first. And especially to show the present day countries that are there now before you do it, I think it helps so much. So let's say we did this. So here at Social Studies School Service, which is where I am, we write all kinds of blogs, and basically we live and breathe social studies 24 hours a day because it's all we do. And we have had just written a blog not that long ago, and it basically, we were pointing out these kind of 4 steps, right? 4 steps to integrate geographic lens into US or world history. And we did this 1, 2, 3, 4, right? Read to create context, questions, so ask students their questions to support inquiry, add some mapping for a hands-on learning experience, and connect to student knowledge. But as I was preparing to speak to you today, it really made me question the 4 steps. Like, it really made me think, I mean, this is totally fine, right? It's great. It's kind of a typical structure. It's great. I'm not in any way knocking it or anything. Just saying, it's got me really thinking is that maybe I have things out of order. Like maybe it's not read to create context first. Maybe it's start with the maps. And it's just had me really thinking, like, what if I had done this order? What if I'd start with some kind of a mapping activity? And then I asked students what questions they had after the mapping activity. And then I had them read. Because now when they're reading, not only is it anchored visually in something, like they saw on the map, but I get the added benefit of, I'm throwing in all those great geography skills. But also now when they're asking questions with the map under their belt. So now when I'm asking them to read, they're reading to answer their own questions that they were curious about, and they're doing it with the visual context. And I think it makes it a lot easier to get to that 4th piece, which is now how do students apply that knowledge or demonstrate that knowledge or connect that knowledge to prior knowledge that they had going in? Like, did I create a better bridge? So I would just say to anyone else, does anyone have any thoughts, like the order you would go in? Because I really think that it might, like, really flipping this idea of being well into the building on the topic before the reading begins. What are you guys doing?
Interesting. I just finished a Manifest Destiny unit, and I had them do kind of the same thing where I gave them a map, and we had numbers on the map of the order in which we added territories to achieve Manifest Destiny, and then had them find out how we got each territory, and they had to find out the circumstances and the treaties and what nations we negotiated with to get the treaties and achieve Manifest Destiny, then began the unit and gave them a lot better prior knowledge. So kind of the
Did
same
they like it? How'd it go? Did they like it better?
They found it difficult, but it could have just been the fact that we were using a textbook and everything. It was a totally flipped thing for them, so they struggled a little bit at first, but it paid off in the long run.
Yeah, do you think they remembered it?
I think so.
Yeah, anyone else?
I started teaching my 10th grade world history class, like with geography as the theme. So we have 6 different regions, and we dive into one region with like a current event sort of essential question that we have to figure out. So the inquiry is there. And then like we kind of pack up our bags, so to speak, and then we go somewhere else. So like we're in one place and dive into the geography for a long time before, instead of doing it sequentially. I think they like it. They seem to give some pretty good feedback. I think their retention is a little bit better because we get to revisit, right? Like I don't have like a World War II unit, but we talk about World War II 6 different times. And they have that sort of story in one location.
Interesting. Are you using a lot of maps? Yeah.
Once I figured out, I just gave them blank maps and I realized that they didn't know geography, like the states of the United States. I mean, it was really, really eye-opening because I think that there's a degree for high school students to think that they already know it or they learned it
Yeah.
somewhere else. And there's some pretty substantial, I think, geography deficits out there.
I think there's really, I think if you gave me a blank map, depending on where it was, I don't know if I could fill it all in. Depending on where
I've been learning a lot using this approach. There's no doubt about that. So yeah, I'm filling in my own deficits.
There you go. Anybody else? Anybody want to share anything about what you're doing now? Okay, so I'm going to go on a little bit more here. So basically, that's what I was kind of getting at is what's the difference? So what's the difference? Like, is it easier? Like, when we looked at the text the second time, like, was it easier to pick up the details? And I didn't do a map lesson. I just walked through kind of what kind of a map lesson I would do with students. But would it be easier to pick up the details the second time? Does your newly found background knowledge help you form a picture in your mind? Can you get to that kind of idea of awareness, right? Have some idea where this took place? And would it make you more ready? Like when we looked at the text the second time, would it make you more ready to learn, more open to learning what you could from the text had you had that experience prior to looking at the text? And I just want to make a couple other points about why maps specifically, or why trying to use them in kind of a hands-on fashion with students writing on maps. Whether that's a paper map you printed out, or whether you have old maps, or you have a wall map where people can point to it, or you're projecting it because you're working remote or hybrid, you're doing everything via Zoom. Whatever resource you have that has that, I think it could have the same impact. And I think that that's true because mapping activities provide a visual dimension to the learning, which doesn't exist in most cases looking at the text, even if there's pictures in the book. And there are tons of free maps out there. The bummer is there's a lot of free maps out there and they don't all work well with students, right? And you can go down the rabbit hole looking at a million free maps. But there are some good. I mean, obviously we have some like Social Studies School Service, but so does Google Maps, and so do a lot of the historical societies. Like there's a lot of maps out there to get a hold of. So there's a lot of free resource, even if you can't buy the ones that you want. If you do have ones that you can have in the physical classroom, maps are great because the kid can hold it up. They can hold up the map as they're working on it. It's easier to observe them. It's easier to know where you're needed and where you need to intervene. And I think the great thing about maps, because they're fun for kids and even for high school students, they're more engaging, is the good thing about maps is you make mistakes and you erase it and you can start over and you can do it again. And it really reinforces that idea of learning as I go. And it's okay to make mistakes along the way. And I love the way that using any kind of a map, it leaves an entry point for any student. Because any student, even if they're struggling with the text, a student can point to something on a map. They can describe something on a map. They can look at two maps together. They can look at the Middle East today, and they can look at a map of the Persian Wars, and they can look at the two side by side, and they can compare and contrast and tell you what the difference is, regardless of how low or high their reading level or comprehension level is. So I love the way that maps give so many entry points for students. I also love that students can use the maps to help other students. Maps are so much more approachable for students to assist other students, because if you're struggling with reading the text, I think a lot of kids are less likely to open up to get support from another student. Whereas if it's a map, you're all kinds of in this new space together, and it's kind of a freer place for them to do that. I also think if students have to add layers of information to a map throughout the lesson, they see the story unfold in a different way than if they read it. So adding each layer of information to a map throughout a lesson, it's almost as though the students are seeing it as it's unfolding before them. So it's kind of like a built-in natural scaffolding that's hard to put in place if they're reading text. I also think writing on the map, marking it increases retention for a million ways. And maybe my personal favorite, if you have a textbook from 1997 and you need to bring it back to life, maps are a great thing to supplement with. Because, if you're always looking for resources that are new and fresh, sometimes it's hard to find that, or it's financially out of your reach to find it, and it's not being provided for you. Then if you have an old textbook, new maps can bring something back to life. I mean, it's amazing how a textbook that's still referencing the Soviet Union or something can really be supplemented with current maps of the region. So I just think you can do that. It can also fill in gaps in the curriculum. So like if you're trying to cover a topic, like say you are doing regional geography or something, and maybe you are doing North America and you need to do Canada, or you're doing, the Middle East and you need to do a specific country. You may not have a lot of content to work with, but using the map can really put the meat on the bones of what you do have, because it will help the understanding of the students so much. And it's just built-in differentiation. There's just so much potential for that. When we use ours, the stuff I used on the fall line lesson came from our own program, which is US history. We also have a world history that comes with like fold out maps that students can write on, but it comes with a great digital component. And it's never been so popular as it has since March of 2020. But students being able to write even on a digital on any device and being able to use maps is so helpful, I think, in just building up their ability to see it, to have that awareness. And working with maps digitally really increases technology skills for students, because it's not that easy to do mapping digitally. I mean, I probably shouldn't say that because we have digital mapping too, but it requires a little bit, you have to put your technology skills to work. And I think it's a great way to help students put technology skills to work. So this is one of our whole programs that comes with all the pieces. But I want to share with you, we have a lot of free stuff that you might find cool. So at socialstudies.com, we have a whole long series of blogs, and they're right at the top of our webpage there. And there's a whole section on geography. I highlighted it here. So you can just go to our socialstudies.com and hit blogs, and you'll see a whole section on geography. And a lot of that talks about like how to integrate this geographic lens into US and world history, and how to integrate maps and things like that into your teaching. So there's a lot of cool ideas. And there's just a lot of other blogs there. Like this is one of our newest: Civil Discourse and Classroom Discussions to Fight Truth Decay, Capitalism, Socialism, Communism, what do these terms really mean? So there's lots of others, but there's a ton on geography about this geographic lens. And so I wanted to let you know about that. And if you want to access the lesson that I did today, or use any of our digital mapping stuff for US or world history, you can go to this link, go.socialstudies.com/Nystrom-world, and I'm going to leave this up. And you can get a free trial, so you can use it, no charge. You can use it for a month. If you wanted to extend it for a month, I'm happy to extend it for you. But you could use these lessons in these student appropriate maps built for students, and you could use them and try them out. It's already February, so you could use them for a couple months and see how it worked with your students. And again, my name is Jennifer Carlson, and it's jennifer@socialstudies.com. It's a very easy one to remember. If you forget everything else I said, but you want me to send you whatever mapping supplies I have that I can, it's jennifer@socialstudies.com. And before I close out, which I did really good, I went really quick, I can't believe it. I just love to hear if anybody wants to share with the group, if you have any cool free mapping resources that anybody might find helpful, or if you have any other better ideas about how to incorporate that geography lens or the use of maps into your instruction.
I did, we have some of your stuff, but I did a grant program with U of M 2 summers in a row for geography. And one of the things, and integrating it with history, one of the really kind of neat ideas we got just to get kids started with maps. And you were talking about geography and background knowledge and familiarity. Of course, right now, nobody's really traveling because of COVID, but to pick up maps, like when you go to amusement parks or the zoo, or like places that the kids might have already been before.
That's like a great idea.
You know, the Detroit Zoo, places that are in their communities or place they visited, and laminate them and do mapping activities with those to start, just to get them used to using maps, because they're maps of things that they, you know, have knowledge of. And that usually, you know, gets them involved in that mapping before you switch to like bringing it into, you know, history and the geography of that. So just a kind of neat idea that I picked up from that.
Lynn, we're the same people. I save every free map that anybody gets, so that I can go back and say, can I have 20 more of those brochures?
When you're at the Detroit Zoo, just pick up like, you know, 10.
Yeah.
10, you know, and then you laminate them, and then you have enough for like a group, right? Well, when we could do groups, but, you know, because we're not really doing those right now.
Yeah.
We can't talk to each other, but you know what I mean? Like, so those kinds of things, or it was just a neat, easy way to get the kids, students, I should say, even older students into doing some mapping activities and skills.
I love it. That's a great idea. Anybody else? Anything you're doing, free map resources you've got, or cool things you're doing with maps?
Yeah, I used Nat Geo has a GIS thing that's free, and we've been talking about refugees in sixth grade social studies and learning about the lost boys of Sudan. And so I started out with paper copies of Africa, Europe, and the United States, and I had kids color the journey, you know, what countries they were in, how they got to the United States. And then we used the Nat Geo right in Google Classroom, and the kids were able to, I had it up on the board, but they were able to actually plot the journey digitally too. And by the time we got to the documentary, you know, where it talked about their journey, they were so engaged. They knew exactly where the kids were, where these boys went. And it just made such a huge difference. And I'm, you know, listening to you talk about doing the maps first, I was like, oh, why am I not doing that with some of my other lessons? It just makes sense. So yeah, but Nat Geo has this GIS, and we were able to also on that map think about, well, what things might they have encountered along the way? Well, let's layer on big cats. And lo and behold, you know, where these boys were, you know, walking 1,000 miles were big cats. And okay, let's layer on climate. Okay, what's the climate difference between where they are from and where they went, you know, which they kind of already knew from talking about climate regions and when we were doing our beginning of the year mapping stuff. But digitally, for them to be able to do that, they were pretty excited about it.
I love it. If anybody wants, you should email me again, Jennifer@socialstudies.com. We've been mapping COVID since March of 2020. And we've done these lessons called Mapping the News. And they're a part of our free trial. So you can go in and use them. But we have done, I think, at least three on COVID. Like the first one was we were literally mapping the outbreak. And the second one was we were mapping country responses. So we're kind of had countries close their border, or had countries allowed air travel, like all these different things. And the third one we're tracking case growth. And I think the one we're working on now is, are we past the peak? So they're really, so if anybody wants access to those, are kind of mapping the news thing, be happy to send that as part of the free trial, and you could use it for a month or two, no charge, and you could use it with your students. Again, it's jennifer@socialstudies.com. Anybody else cool mapping stuff? Map resources, free maps, anything you're using that's working?
I found that even older kids, they still like to draw and color.
Are you kidding, Mike? I do. I love it.
Yeah, exactly. So I just finished up imperialism unit in 10th grade world history. And I said, look, color and circle, the Russia's imperial goals in Europe with regard to Turkey, right?
Mhm.
And it was, so if you incorporate like reading along with that, it makes it more fun. And again, it's all about engagement, and they really liked it. So
Plus, that's a hard read.
yeah, for sure.
I mean, that's a hard read. That's a hard read for me. I mean, if you said, "Hey, read this right now," about that's a hard read. It's a hard read, I think, for anybody if you haven't been somehow, if you didn't throw out the line and reel them in a little bit, it's a hard read.
Yeah.
Anybody else? Stuff that's working, stuff that you're doing, you want to share?
Yeah, I just got a quick question. I'm going to email you tomorrow about the free accounts, and then possibly ordering some for you. If you order the accounts, does it say they're good for 5 years of licensing? Is that how it works? Or
Yeah, the Nystrom World one, most of those you can do just 1 year. You don't have to do 5 years. There are 5-year licenses. Like if you get the print stuff with it, it's 5 years, but you can do just 1 year if you don't want to do 5 years. It's up to you.
Okay,
but you could try it free first and then see if it's, if you like it. And then, boy, are we the soft sales pitch or what? Yeah, David, call us up and order all our stuff. No, seriously though, you could try it out for a month for free, and we can extend it for another month if you want to see if it works well for you first.
Okay, because I probably like 3 people that need to try it, and then we probably plan on placing an order. So if
100%.
I'll send you
email me and I'll send you a link you can use for everyone.
All right, thank you.
My pleasure. Anybody else? Stuff you're doing? Stuff you want to share?
Hi, I mentioned something earlier in the chat about using My Maps with Google. It's not the same as Maps. You have to type in mymaps.google.com, but I'm going to put another link in the chat box. This is a preview of one that I did with my students of layers where we added in pictures and we changed symbols dealing with World War I and then World War II. And so the kids really enjoyed it because you could bring in YouTube videos, you could add other things to it, and they wrote descriptions about like details of what was happening in that specific battle. So that's a sample of some things that I really like doing with the kids because they need that spatial awareness. I think it helps tie everything together.
I agree. I completely agree. Yeah, our digital mapping, we have that too, where you can drop pins in there and import videos, and our best stuff that ends up getting saved is student stuff because they're amazing, the stuff they find. They upload primary sources, they drop, pins in the maps with primary sources in there, videos, they do videos. And then I had one I saw where a kid had done like a super old press conference. And they had found a video to an old press conference and put it in there as a primary source. So yeah, the imagination goes wild when you give them a tool. Anybody else? Stuff you're using that's working or that you want to put in the chat bar for other people to pick up? Okay, I think I tapped everybody out. Thank you so much for coming. I really appreciate it. Honestly, I'm shocked to my socks when, people show up. You always get paranoid that nobody's going to come to your session. So thank you for coming. I really appreciate it. And if you want the free trial to try out our digital stuff free, if you don't want to remember all these links, it's just jennifer@socialstudies.com. That's super easy. And just tell me what you're teaching and anything that I can send you that you can use for free for a while, I'd be happy to send it over. So it's jennifer@socialstudies.com.